My uncle didn't want to make me a partner in the family business and chose his inexperienced son instead, but the competition has hired me and now I'm a traitor to them. Hello, I'm a 30-year-old woman and recently my family has sidelined me for leaving the family business and standing up to my uncle, who is retiring this year. I'm here to ask if I'm in the wrong. To put it in context, my dad, who would have turned 63 this year, had two younger brothers, Brian, 59, and Scott, 56. All of them inherited the real estate business from my grandfather. My grandfather expected the three brothers to run the place as co-owners, and everything would be fine. However, 6 years after my grandfather retired, my uncle Scott decided to split from the business and start his own. With that, he was also cut off from the family, as no one liked his decision to compete with his own brothers in the business. For the last 16 years, no one in the family has spoken to him. They don't even acknowledge his existence. They pretend he was never part of the family. I had learned to do the same. Anyway, my dad passed away 3 years ago due to double kidney failure. His health wasn't good even before that, and he had been training me to take over in case he ended up bedridden. Obviously, no one expected him to die, but it was good that I was prepared to take on his responsibilities and handle the duties he had in the company. Not only had I been doing his job and helping my Uncle Brian run the company for the past 3 years, but since I graduated from business school, I had been working with my dad and uncle to learn everything because I eventually hoped to become a partner in the business. It's been almost 9 years since I started working there, and I obviously expected to eventually be made a partner in the company, as that's what my dad wanted. However, about 10 days ago, I found out that my uncle had decided to make his son a partner and that I would remain in the position of CFO. When my dad was alive, he was the CEO and my uncle was the CFO. After his death, my uncle took over as CEO and I was promoted to CFO. Now, if someone was supposed to take my uncle's place because he's retiring in a couple of years, shouldn't it be me? My cousin Dean wasn't even in the picture, so this decision really took me by surprise. He's 23 years old and just graduated a year ago. He has a degree in economics but no practical knowledge or experience. More than anything, he's too young to be a partner in the company. He hasn't paid his dues, and I know for sure he doesn't deserve it more than I do. Naturally, I was very upset when I found out about this. I didn't even find out directly from my uncle. It was my mom who told me that she had just heard from her sister-in-law, Dean's mom, that I had turned down the opportunity to be a partner in the company, and that's why my uncle was offering it to Dean. When my mom told me this, I instantly called my uncle because we hadn't had any conversation about it, and I thought it was a joke. But when we talked on the phone, he told me he was seriously considering making Dean the CEO of the company and a partner in the firm because he was going to announce his retirement in a couple of months. I was in shock and reminded him that Dean hadn't worked a single day in his life. Until now, he had spent the entire last year finding himself and exploring, so he was pretty inexperienced and definitely not up to the job. Then my uncle told me that apparently that's where I come in because since I'll be mentoring him, he won't have anything to worry about. It's not that they don't need me in the company anymore. He still needs me to handle everything while Dean gets accustomed, and I would still be the CFO of the company. But I didn't agree with that. I told him I had worked very hard for the past 9 years and wanted the respect I deserved. Dean definitely didn't deserve this position, and I made it very clear that I wasn't happy with this decision. I told him that if he decided to make Dean a partner in the firm and CEO, then I would resign from my position and leave the company. My uncle tried to tell me I was overreacting, that he was only doing this to secure Dean's future because he wouldn't settle for anything less than the CEO position. He didn't want Dean to separate from the company like Uncle Scott did, so this was his only option, and he hoped I would understand. He even tried to reassure me by saying that Dean would only be the nominal head of the company, but that I would really be in charge, and he knew that even Dean would respect me. I tried to negotiate with him. I told him I would be willing to settle for my CFO position, but I wanted him to make me a partner in the company. He said he didn't know if he could do that since he had to talk to Dean first, but I didn't care. I had done the work and wanted to be CEO and a partner, or at least just a partner. He could do that or I would leave. It was an ultimatum. When my uncle and I ended up arguing about this, he finally told me that we live in a free country so I could do what I wanted, but his decision was already made. He'd also discussed this with the board members, and in a few days, he would make his announcement. His decision was already made, and I could accept it or leave, as I had said. It was a horrible day for me, realizing exactly where I stood with my uncle, because I always thought we had a good relationship. Clearly, When it came to our relationship in a professional capacity, I had overestimated how close we were. It's not surprising either. Dean has always been quite spoiled, and I'm not surprised that my uncle chose him over me. He is his flesh and blood, so of course, I could never compete. Anyway, I was very upset about how things turned out, and my mom had suggested that I even look for a lawyer and sue them legally, but I didn't want to do that. Instead, I had a better plan in mind that would really make them angry. I guess most of you could figure out what I did next, but for those who don't know yet, I emailed my Uncle Scott that same day. I briefly told him everything that had happened and said I would be willing to work for him now if he accepted me. I didn't feel like sitting around mourning what I had lost. The only thing on my mind was getting back at my uncle, so I didn't think twice before contacting Uncle Scott. In less than 24 hours, I had a response from him. He said he was willing to offer me the CFO position and would be open to promoting me to CEO in a couple of years after his retirement. He had accepted my terms of making me a partner in the company since I was willing to tell him everything I knew about my company to help him. So a few days ago, we finally met in person and it was a pretty fun meeting. I only had to distance myself from him because my parents and the rest of my family demanded it, but aside from that, I never had a bad relationship with my Uncle Scott. In fact, he was always the fun uncle, and until I was 15, he and I were pretty close. But then the fight happened and he was excluded, and I couldn't talk to him again until now. When I was younger, they never told me exactly what led to my Uncle Scott being separated from the family, and even now, when I saw him, he refused to talk about it. But that was his choice, and I needed to respect it. However, he told me he was surprised that my Uncle Brian had done something like this because when my dad was alive, he wouldn't have dared to try something like that. Anyway, he was happy because it worked in his favor, and he said he'd love to have me on board. He had only heard good things about me. Since they were our closest competitors, they had been keeping an eye on us and our operations. He said he knew what I had done for the company was quite significant and was looking forward to having me on his side this time. He also assured me that unlike Uncle Brian, he didn't have any children, so I didn't have to worry about that aspect. We wrapped everything up, and I submitted my resignation that same day. Uncle Brian didn't seem affected in the slightest by the fact that I resigned. I sent him a formal message to inform him that I wouldn't be coming in for the next 2 weeks since he had made it very clear that the company would be fine without me. He told me that was fine and that he already had replacements ready, so I didn't need to worry about my position. That was it. I didn't interact with him after that. However, yesterday, Uncle Scott and I finally posted a picture together to celebrate the fact that I was joining him. I went out to dinner with the team to meet some of the senior executives of his company and socialize with them before starting work. To say that my family is literally falling apart would be an understatement because since I made the post last night, I've been bombarded with text messages, voice messages, and phone calls. Obviously, I haven't responded to anyone, but I can tell that people are very upset. Uncle Brian is furious and has already labeled me a traitor, telling me that he'll make sure I suffer the consequences of this move. He can try whatever he wants. I've also been condemned by many other family members, which I find strange because from the messages they sent, it seems they already know I did all this just because they didn't let me become a partner in the firm and overlooked me in favor of Dean. If they didn't speak up about the injustice of what they were doing to me back then, they have no right to criticize me now. The only opinion that really matters to me is my mother's. When I spoke to her this morning, she didn't seem happy with my decision either. That really surprised me because a few days ago, she had been urging me to see a lawyer to get what was rightfully mine, but now she thinks I'm going too far. She told me there's a lot of history with my Uncle Scott that I simply don't know, and she doesn't think it's appropriate for me to know either. That was pretty frustrating because if they're not going to tell me exactly why Uncle Scott was excluded from the family, I don't think I can decide whether I can trust him or not. I'm an adult woman, so I think I can handle the truth, and they don't need to protect me. So far from his behavior, he's been very kind to me, and I don't see any reason to cut ties with him. But anyway, my mom said the family was very upset with me, and she herself wasn't happy with this either. But if I had already made a decision, there was very little she could do to change it. I tried to talk to her, but she just hung up and said she needed to process what was going on. Now I have incredibly mixed feelings about what's happening. Am I the bad one for joining our competitors after my uncle refused to make me a partner in the company and chose his son over me? Edit. Hi, some people were confused about how I got the job at Uncle Scott's company so quickly. Well, it was actually pure luck. His CFO was retiring in a couple of months anyway, and he had been looking for someone to replace him. Luckily, I sent him an email at the right time, so that's how I got this opportunity. It's like the stars and planets aligned for me here too. Also, some of you wanted to know how things were with my Uncle Scott before he was excluded from the family. Honestly, things were never really that bad when I was little. My dad, Uncle Brian, and Uncle Scott were always very close. From what I had seen, I knew they had a big fight, and that's why Uncle Scott decided to leave the company and start his own business. But to this day, I really don't know what it was about. No one wants to talk about it, so I can't give you that information since I don't have it myself. However, my relationship with him was always good, and I think I mentioned that in my original post too. Even now, when I reached out to him by writing that email, his response was very cordial and warm. Honestly, I don't know why my family has such a terrible opinion of him. They've called him everything, referring to him as cunning, narcissistic, selfish, and other things, but every time I've interacted with him, I've never felt he was any of those things. I'm very confused about who to believe. I really don't want to make a mistake again by trusting someone because I trusted my Uncle Brian, and look where that got me. I don't want the same thing to happen with Uncle Scott either, so I need to be extra careful with these things. And since my mom isn't exactly happy with me right now, I really don't know who to turn to for advice. I can't talk to my friends about this because it's too personal and complicated. Update 1. It's been 3 days since people found out I was going to work with Uncle Scott. After the initial reaction, people have simply stopped talking to me. I guess that's fair now that I'm associated with Uncle Scott. They're treating me the same way they've treated him. Honestly, I still have no idea what happened between them all those years ago, but I've already chosen which side I want to be on, and I can't go back to being honest. The history of their relationship doesn't even matter to me. It's not like I can quit and go back to working with Uncle Brian. Now I need a job to support myself and the lifestyle I've gotten used to, and I need a lot of money, obviously. So whatever it is, I'm here now, and I'm going to make the most of my situation. I talked to Uncle Scott about how the family was treating me as if I were an outcast. He seemed very sad but told me that this was exactly what happened to him. He said that over time, I would get over it too. Maybe I'll even be luckier than he was since I'm from a younger generation and they might contact me in time. But until then, I just have to hold on and deal with it. Once again, I asked him what had happened that led to all of this, but he refused to talk about it. My mother still isn't speaking to me, which is what hurts me the most. I've been texting her every day, and I haven't received a response so far. I'm going to be really busy with work in the coming days because I just started here and there's a lot of work I need to catch up on. Now, if she wants to talk to me, she can send me a message herself, but other than that, I'm not going to try to contact her anymore. Update 2. It's been 6 days since I started working with Uncle Scott, and things have been going pretty well. The paperwork to make me a partner in the company is still being processed, but I trust him implicitly. He has treated me with nothing but warmth and respect so far. I even feel more comfortable than I did at my previous company. I guess I have to say that everyone in my family was wrong about him. He has been very transparent with me about everything that's going on. He told me that unlike my previous company, they are a private company, so he'll have to get the board of directors to approve everything regarding me before he can finalize everything. But he told me not to worry, because as the owner and CEO, it's just a formality, and I have nothing to be concerned about. Since I've already met most of the people associated with the company, and they all seem to like me a lot. They know my previous work and know I'm worth it. So, as Uncle Scott told me, I'm not too worried about this situation, and I'm going to focus on working. Things on the work front are going pretty well for me, but my personal life is a mess right now. To be honest, my mother and I haven't spoken since that last conversation, and I can't even count how many days have passed since then. I've felt really alone. No one else in the family has spoken to me either, and it's hard, but I'm trying to deal with it. I still have some friends from Uncle Brian's company, and they've kept me informed about what's going on. Apparently, they've already announced that I left, but they didn't include the fact that I left to work with Uncle Scott, probably because it wouldn't reflect well on the company that someone in a position like mine left to work with their direct competitors. They also announced that Dean would take over as CEO in a couple of months after Uncle Brian retires, and that he would also become a partner in the company. They're organizing a work party in his honor in a few days. As for the CFO position that became vacant when I left, it's being filled by one of the employees who always had issues with me. They probably did that on purpose just to annoy me. However, it just made me feel sad for them. If that employee had problems with me, I'm pretty sure they'll have problems with them in the future too, but that's a problem they'll have to deal with now. Anyway, I talked to my friends at the company and told them they were free to join me with Uncle Scott now as we could offer them better salaries. Ultimately, it's up to them, but I can tell that some of them really want to work with me because they're not too confident about the changes happening in the company and they think it would be better for them to leave while they still can. So I made the offer. Let's see who switches sides.